All right, great. So I'm going to get us started. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for one of our first, for at least this year, and for the local elections, our first civic engagement and get out the vote conversations. You know, as I hope everyone knows that PACC is definitely committed to making sure that everyone in our community votes, but especially making sure that the Arab and Palestinian voices are represented in this county and beyond. And so we're very excited to be presenting this event and more of these coming soon, so that we can also focus and make sure we're focusing on all the local elections that are coming up, because those are just as important, if not arguably more important, right? And do really give real-time effects to our communities than the sometimes other elections that take more of a national presence. And so with that, I'm just gonna go ahead and get us started. Today's focus is on the upcoming vote on April 20th. And so we're really honored and excited to have Dr. Danny Robertosi, who is the Superintendent and Chief School Administrator for the Clifton Public School District and has been since July 1st, 2019. Previously, he was the Superintendent of Schools for the Linden Public School District in Union City, New Jersey. Dr. Robertosi is an accomplished educator and administrator with experience at the elementary, middle, high school, and district level. He's an outstanding leader with a record of improving academic achievement and inspiring excellence in others. And so we're really honored and grateful that you agreed to be in conversation with us today. So I know that you have a presentation lined up for us, so we're gonna hand it off the floor. I guess the virtual floor is yours for that, and then we'll go into some Q&A that we've prepared. Just so everyone else knows, you're definitely gonna have a chance to ask your own questions. Please feel free to put them in the chat, or if you're watching from Facebook, feel free to comment them on Facebook, and I'm gonna monitor both, and then we'll take questions in the order that they were received. But with that, on behalf of PACC, Dr. Danny Robertosi, thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that. I'm coming back just so I could get that introduction again. That was fabulous. Thank you so very much. I want to thank PACC for inviting me here tonight. It truly is my honor to be here to speak to members of our community. And let me start out the evening by expressing to those who do celebrate the upcoming Ramadan holiday, Ramadan Mubarak. For those who celebrate, hope that you have a healthy fast and a great month. As the superintendent of schools, my job is to oversee the day-to-day operations of the entire district. So I'm here tonight to talk about this upcoming referendum vote on April 20th. And I'm here to not tell you how to vote. I'm not allowed to do that. I'm not allowed to ask you to vote yes or to vote no. I'm here to try to educate the public, number one, on why you should vote, right? It's important. It's an important right that we have in this country to vote, and what you are actually voting for. So my job is to try to educate tonight. I am happy to stay as long as possible. After I do have a formal presentation that my partner in crime, Barry Mahmoud, is going to facilitate for me. And he's going to help me out if necessary during the presentation. Barry, feel free to jump in at any time. I can't see you the way my layout is right now, so you can just interrupt me. And please interrupt with any questions that you might have. I'd also like to recognize Mr. Fahim Abdrabo, who is our Board of Education Vice President. He is not here tonight as a board member. He is here tonight as a member of PACC, but I do want to recognize him and thank him for being here. So having said that, Barry, would you mind sharing your screen for the presentation?
Got you.
Thanks, Barry. This hashtag, We Are One Clifton, is something that I've been pushing for the last year. Clifton, as all of the citizens that live in Clifton know, is one of the most diverse communities in the state of New Jersey and in the United States of America. But our schools are at the forefront where everybody gets together, that community. And when we have a strong school district, our community benefits from the strength of its schools. So One Clifton is about our entire city coming together. And it just so happened that this year we're having a referendum vote on April 20th. That's a week from tomorrow. Gary, could you move up to the next, Barry, could you move up to the next slide? So what is proposed in this referendum? We are asking the community to borrow money. And I'll explain what a bond referendum is on the next slide. The Clifton Public School budget is about $200 million a year. We have 19 school buildings, almost 11,000 students, and almost 1,700 staff members. We are a very, very big operation. And what we're asking the citizens of Clifton to do is to vote on a referendum so that we can improve our HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning in our district. We're asking the public's help in modernizing our bathrooms, reinforcing security, renovating our auditoriums and some athletic facilities. And we're asking to help make our district more ADA compliant, accessible to public, to the people who may have permanent or temporary disabilities. ADA is the American Disabilities Act, and virtually none of our schools, and certainly very few of our bathrooms, are ADA compliant. So the point is, this bond referendum will benefit the students and staff at all of our district schools. Barry? So what exactly is a bond referendum? It's a vote in which the school district is seeking permission to borrow money through the sale of bonds. It requires voter approval. It's used for large scale improvements. So when I mentioned earlier, our annual budget is $200 million a year. We couldn't possibly expect to do all of the projects that we know need to be done out of our regular budget. It's just simply too much money. So a referendum is used for large scale improvements to the district. And most importantly, and I'll explain more on this later, a referendum captures state aid that is not available any other way. So in order for the Board of Education to borrow money, the voters in Clifton have to vote yes and allow it to happen. And by voting yes, I mean you need one more yes vote than no vote in order to borrow the money. And if approved, the bonds are paid back over time. In this case, 25 years. The same way that you might buy a car and finance it over 5 or 6 years, or you may buy a house and get a mortgage and pay it over 20 or 30 years. That's what a referendum is. Barry? So why now is a question that I've been asked. Ventilation and climate control have been a topic of conversation prior to me arriving in Clifton in July 2019. The vast majority of our schools do not have air conditioning. The vast majority of our schools have univentilators in each classroom that are more than 60 years old. They were meant to last 15 or 20 years. Some of them are 60 years old. And especially over the last year with the COVID-19, there has been a big push for better ventilation in schools. And so new HVAC systems would allow for new heating, ventilation, and air conditioning in every single building in the entire district. And it would provide a more comfortable environment for students to learn. We want to upgrade our security cameras. We want to provide two-step entrances, or what are known as security vestibules, at each building. Currently, only School 17 has this type of setup. We have a lot of other measures that we're proposing to enhance security. For example, more key locks, locking doors, systems that would direct emergencies directly to the Clifton Police Department. And although a referendum is typically about making facilities better, please understand that by making facilities better, by putting students in a more comfortable and safe environment, we are absolutely going to help improve education. Students learn best when they're safe and when they're comfortable. So whatever we can do physically is going to help our students learn. Our old bathrooms are often in disrepair. Barry could probably share with you some stories about his middle school and high school years, or maybe even elementary years, about bathrooms. Some of our bathrooms are 100 years old. This vote was delayed a year by COVID. We were going to have this vote in September of 2020. So improving our schools is critical to attract and retain Clifton residents. Barry? Here's a sample timeline of what we expect to take place and going back how this started. So you'll see back in 2018, a year prior to my arrival, this board, the Board of Education, already knew that there needed to be substantial improvement to the facilities. And so in 2019, when I got here, I spent the first 2 months of my time on the job touring the facilities, talking to people, and over again, not from just what I've seen, but from talking to staff, from talking to parents, over and over again, the first thing on everybody's mind was our aging facilities. Our facilities need to be renovated, need to be revamped, or we need new facilities. I knew that, the board knew that, and so in February of 2020, the board proposed that we try to get all of this work done through a referendum. Of course, everyone knows what happened in March of 2020 when the world stopped. And so along with the world stopping and schools closing, the referendum was put on hiatus. And we revived this plan in January of 2021. The vote is now a week from tomorrow. If it's approved, the work won't be able to start for even a year. There's so much work that has to be done. You have to finance the bonds, you have to hire the contractors, there has to be drawing and engineers. So in about a year, the work will start, but most of the work will be completed by fall of 2023, and your tax bills won't change until 2022. More on that later. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that by passing a referendum, it's a way to get state aid for your school district. And I want to explain a little more why this is the most important thing. If you don't hear anything I say tonight, this is the most important part of this referendum. When a school district passes a bond referendum, when the citizens vote yes and say, yes, Board of Education, you can borrow this money through bonds, the state of New Jersey pays almost 1/3 of the costs. So let me say that again. We want to do all these renovations. If we wanted to do it through our budget, we couldn't do it in 1 year. But if we wanted to do it over 10, 15, 20 years, we'd be paying 100% of the cost. When you pass a referendum, the state of New Jersey kicks in 1/3 of the cost. So we're asking for $168 million. The state of New Jersey is going to kick in $55 million. That's incredibly important to this referendum. And it's why this referendum makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. So this state aid is kind of like having all of these projects done without any local taxes. Heat boiler, generating boilers are at 8 sites, 100+ group bathrooms. All of the district-wide security and technology that we want would be covered by the state aid. And an elevator at Christopher Columbus Middle School. Christopher Columbus Middle School is a 4-story building that does not have an elevator. So if you are a faculty, staff member, or student who has a disability, whether that's a permanent disability or even temporary, you can't get up and down the stairs. You can't go from class to class. So we have to either move you to a different building or put a student on home instruction, which is not obviously not educationally sufficient. Next slide, please. So how does the state aid work? State aid is provided over 25 years of the bond payback. So each year, the board will pay back this loan, this $168 million loan. And each year, the state will be helping to make the loan payments. So $168 million, state picks up $55 million. The net cost on the taxpayers of Clifton is $113 million, spread out over 25 years. And the interest rates for bond borrowing at this time, I'm told by the finance experts, are the lowest that they've ever been or have been in a long, long time. So that just simply means it's a good time to borrow money if you need to borrow money. Next slide, please. So HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. The new systems would be much more energy efficient, and they would replace some systems that are up to 16 years old. If you or a family member has allergies or asthma, people rely on air conditioning for relief, just to be comfortable. Most people, with the exception of teachers and other staff members that work in schools, most people, unless they're working a manual labor job outside, have air conditioning in their office. Most families, most, I say, not everyone, most families have air conditioning in their household. But there's some kind of stigma when it comes to schools about, well, why do they need air conditioning in schools? But remember, this is just not about air conditioning. It's about new heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So the modernized systems also provide more air filtration, more ventilation, and these units will be placed in every large group facility in our district, every gymnasium, every auditorium, every cafeteria, and then there will be new individual units for every classroom. Next slide, please. And please, if there are any questions, I don't mind being interrupted. Please just verbally interrupt me because I can't see anyone on the screen. And then at the end of the presentation, I will also stay and answer any questions that anyone has. We'll also replace 8 boilers in our schools through this referendum. Our current boilers are well maintained, but as you can see from the picture on the left, they're ancient. They've far exceeded their useful lifespan. New boilers would be installed at 7 schools and the administration building, and the replacement boilers would cycle on and off for improved efficiency, and of course, just be more efficient, would reduce our gas and oil bills. Next slide. One of the things about security is that security and ventilation, people don't often think that sometimes they go hand in hand, but we're proposing to build these security vestibules at each school. And you can see a sample picture. And what that does is it creates a 2-step process to get into the building. You have to get buzzed in through 2 doors. So we make it very difficult for people to get into the front door of the building, right? You have to have an appointment or you have to have a reason to be visiting the school. We're going to be passing and creating a new policy that's going to require, possibly require an appointment system. But when you drive by any of our schools in May, in June, in September, if we have summer programs, you'll see on hot days, every window on the first floor is wide open. So you might not be able to get through the front door, but if somebody really wanted to get into our schools, there's unfortunately a lot of ways to do that. HVAC would certainly help that. You don't have to open the windows with new heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. The other security piece would be to improve the emergency communication. Our phones would be linked directly to the Clifton Police Department. Our public address systems would be replaced. New lighting systems for drills and for real emergencies. New video surveillance in our elementary schools and upgraded systems at our middle school and high school, and new lockdown mechanisms. We'll be able to lock down the school in the event of an emergency with the push of a button. We'll add panic buttons, and we're going to expand the access controls to nearly every door in the district. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, the vast majority of our schools are not accessible to every member of the public. So the new security entrances will include ramps to allow access for everyone. We'll add an elevator at Christopher Columbus Middle School. Every bathroom will be renovated and ADA accessible. And as I mentioned earlier, currently students or staff with mobility issues might have to be reassigned to a different school. We wouldn't need to do that anymore. Next slide. We have four major auditoriums in our district. Thankfully, the board several years ago spent millions of dollars and upgraded the auditorium at Clifton High School. For those of you who've been there, it's beautiful. If you haven't, the proposal is to make our middle school and School 3 auditorium similar to what we've done at the high school, while taking into account some of the historical architecture that's there. We want to replace the broken seats, outdated lighting, put in new walls and ceiling fixtures. And it's not just to make it look nicer. The auditoriums are the places where students have classes. Some students learn there. You have your orchestra classes, you have your music lessons, and you have other classes that take place in auditoriums. It's also the place where the community gathers. It's the place where the community goes when there's an event at the school, when there's a play, when there's a concert. And it's the first thing that people see about a school. And quite frankly, if you walk into our middle school auditoriums, in my opinion, when I first saw them the first time, it was embarrassing. And it gave me a very negative feeling about, well, if the auditoriums look like this, what do the rest of the schools look like? And it just gave me a negative view. And if people's first impression of your district is negative, that's not a good sign. So we're proposing to add these auditoriums to the referendum. Next slide, Barry. And as I mentioned earlier, some of our bathrooms are 100 years old. It's not just a cosmetic issue. We're not doing it because we just want the bathrooms to look nice. We're going to make all the fixtures ADA compatible. We're going to fix broken toilets and sinks. We're going to put in fixtures that are touchless, especially in this age of COVID-19. We don't have that. We're going to add more privacy and urinal partitions in our bathrooms. There is very little ventilation in our bathrooms. That's going to be fixed. I have had parents tell me that their kids refuse to utilize the bathroom at school. They'll go all day without utilizing the bathroom because they're just old, and it's not even that they're dirty, that the custodians aren't cleaning, but there's only so much you can clean a 100-year-old bathroom. So we want to fix that issue. Next slide, Barry. We're proposing to expand our weight room. The current equipment is set up in an old locker room. You can see from the picture on the top, there's some weights that were thrown in a shower. The expansion would allow all of our students, not just our student athletes, all of our students to utilize the space. We want to repair the boys and girls locker rooms, including new bathrooms, improved lighting and ventilation. And this was included in the bond proposal because state aid is going to cover 1/3 of the cost. The weight room only accounts for 0.3% of the total project cost. And I'll tell you why that's important after the next slide. Barry, the next slide. The other athletic type project that's included in this referendum is a new turf field and field house at Woodrow Wilson Middle School. The current field, for those of you who've been there, you know why it's needed. If you've never been there, do a drive-by one day, and I think you'll be surprised. The current field, the use of it is limited. If it rains, that field goes out of use for a couple weeks, 3 weeks. A new turf field would allow multi-sports to be played, be easier to maintain. It would deter the geese that are currently infesting Woodrow. Kids go out for phys ed, they come in back in the school with geese poop all over their feet, they drag it through the school. It would allow every student who attends Woodrow Wilson to have physical education class outside. So it's not just for student athletes, it's for every student, but it's also for the wider community. For any student that partakes in a youth league or a recreation league, will all benefit from new bleachers, a dugout, a field house with bathrooms. There's no bathrooms there. There's a nice porta potty, really nice porta potty there. There's no bathrooms. And again, this is included in the bond proposal because the state aid is going to pay a third of the cost. So I have heard some criticism from some members of the public about why the board would include these two, the weight room and the turf field. Why would the board include these athletic type things into a referendum? And for me, there's a couple reasons. One, the state's going to pay a third of it. Two, it's not just for athletes. However, I will tell you that 40% of students who attend Clifton High School play at least one sport. And sports do have the ability to change people's lives. But more importantly, it's for the community. It will be allowed to be used by the recreation department and other leagues, not just our students. So we really think that it's an important piece. And by the way, the turf field and the weight room together really only add up to 0.9%, less than 1% of the entire project. Next slide, Barry. Okay, so we're almost done here. But this might be the most important thing for some people, right? Okay, we hear you, we agree all these projects need to be done. What is it going to cost me? So if you own a home in Clifton, the estimated cost is going to be about $17 per month based on a home at the average assessed value. Now, if you want to find out exactly or a better estimate of how much it's going to cost you, you can go on to the Clifton Public Schools website, and we have a link there where you can check your property address and check what your assessed value is. And you look at your assessed value and compare it towards the chart. State aid, again, is going to give us $55 million that we would not normally get if not passed by a referendum. We have 25 years to pay it off. The district currently has very little debt, and it would not affect your taxes until 2022. Next slide, Barry. So, ladies and gentlemen, Clifton votes next Tuesday, April 20th. The polls, in-person polls, will be open from 1:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. The poll locations are School 5, School 9, School 12, Christopher Columbus Middle School, Woodrow Wilson Middle School, and Clifton High School. You will be getting, if you are a registered voter, you will be getting a sample ballot in the mail. That sample ballot will tell you where you're supposed to go to vote. If you don't receive it or you're not sure, again, you can go to our website. There is a link where you can search. You can, number one, first, you can search to see if you're a registered voter. Two, you can search based on your address and it will tell you what your polling location is. If you voted in the presidential election last November, then that means you're a registered voter. There's nothing else you need to do but show up to the polls on April 20th. It's too late now to request a mail-in ballot. Actually, no, you can until tomorrow, but you'd have to hand deliver it. But if you get a mail-in ballot, we just encourage you to send in that mail-in ballot prior to April 20th. Sending it earlier is advised. But as long as you're a registered voter, you can show up to your polling place on Tuesday, April 20th from 1:30 to 8 p.m. and you will be allowed to vote. And Barry, the last slide, please. If there's something that I didn't cover in the presentation, if there's a question that you have after we leave here tonight, please go to our website. There is a trove of information at www.clifton.k12.nj.us vote. And if there's a question that's not covered on the website or that you didn't hear tonight, you can email that email address on the screen, oneclifton@cliftonschools.net. You will get an answer in a reasonable amount of time. And I want to thank everyone who took the time to spend time with me tonight to learn more about this vital referendum. And all I can do is ask that you make an educated vote on Tuesday, April 20th. So thank you so much. And I'd answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much for that, just that presentation. I mean, I didn't grow up here, so I honestly had no idea that these were actually the conditions at Clifton High for our students. So thank you for bringing that awareness and for advocating for our youth as you always do. So I want to remind everyone to please leave comments and questions that you have in the chat, whether on Facebook or here. We are monitoring both. And now I'm going to hand it off to Barry to just start it off with some of the questions that we prepared. And then as other questions come in, I'll kind of interject with some audience questions too. Go ahead, Barry.
Thank you again, Dr. Arbertozzi, for the presentation and the insight. As always, just watching the presentation alone, it makes it gets me excited for the vote, and I'm sure that everyone else is too. So I just have a couple questions for you.
And Barry, you are, you're a senior at Clifton High School. You've spent your entire career in the Clifton Public Schools. And you have been a part of the referendum committee, the district-wide committee, as a student leader. And you know how impressed I am by you and how highly I think of you. But I think that what you see and your opinion matters for those people who may not think that this is needed. So later on, after your prepared questions, I would love to hear your perspective as a student on this referendum.
I'd be more than happy to, give you all of my insight. So the first question we have is, as you presented before, you gave us the rundown of why this referendum, this vote is needed now. So what would be your response to someone who would say that this is not an adequate time for the vote? And do you agree in any way about it being somewhat inadequate of a time?
It's a great question, Barry. I certainly can understand why some people might think it's an inadequate time. It's a bad time. Obviously, we're coming out of a global pandemic, and we're still kind of in the thick of it, but we're starting to come out of it where people can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I know there are plenty of people who have been impacted financially by this, but the truth is, I don't think there's a better time than the present, because you have a group of people who will say, well, why wasn't all this work done already, right? Then you have a group of people who say, well, can't we wait another year or two? And then you have a group of people who say, well, we shouldn't do this anyway. So it's my feeling that you have to do this now. It cannot wait any longer. But it's not just my opinion. I'm the superintendent. I run the day-to-day operations. We have a board of education that is made up of 9 people who are elected. 9 people who are elected and know our schools very well. And they unanimously voted to approve putting this referendum on the ballot. So I think that says something, that the people who have been elected by the community also think that this referendum should take place. So I guess the short answer is there's no better time like the present.
And actually following up on that, I'm going to interject a little bit because I do want to make sure student voices are heard. So we actually have someone on the call who graduated already, but does kind of want to share a little bit as a previous student, her experience with why this is needed, not just now, but maybe would have been nice beforehand too. So Lieli, if you want to unmute and share.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abir. Thank you so much for your presentation. Barry, thank you for helping the presentation. But I graduated from Clifton High School in 2018, and I went to Clifton Public Schools basically my entire life I was in the Clifton public school system. And everything that you went over today in this presentation was very much true and very needed. I would say when I first started as a freshman at CHS, I was terrified to use the bathrooms because of the conditions, and it wasn't nice to use the bathrooms. It wasn't nice to sit in the classroom in the winter. The heat wouldn't work, or if the heat was working, it was too hot. The heat was overheating. And then summertime came around my freshman year, and I remember the class of 2018 was so upset and so angry. And half of us were in the main building and the other half were in the annex at the time. And everyone was so jealous of the kids who were in the annex building because there was AC in there because it was an older building. And I remember they kind of started like a petition almost to send to the VPs and to the principal to, get us that air conditioning in our classrooms. And it was like shut down, and it was continued to be shut down for the 4 years that I was in CHS. And there wasn't really a lot done to accommodate students, not only in bathrooms and air conditioning, but other things too, in terms of funding of programs. I was in orchestra all 4 years, and Miss Babiak, she did an amazing job for us all 4 years to help us, get scholarship money and raise us things to have our concerts. And it would have been nice to have the Clifton public school system behind us to have that funding there. Instead, a lot of the funding from those programs from the fine arts kind of had to get pushed to the side and cut down a little bit, especially because we put like the new turf in the stadium and all that happened. So it's good that this is happening now. And if I don't live in Clifton anymore, but if I did, I would definitely go for this 100%. I think this is a super important conversation to have.
Leah, thank you for sharing that. And I just want to piggyback on what you're saying a little bit. And you talk specifically really about Clifton High School.
Yeah.
And I've heard what you've said about Clifton High School from many other students. What you may not know is that Clifton High School is actually one of the schools that is in better shape than some of our other schools. Understand what I mean? So some of our schools are over 100 years old. Clifton High School is one of our newer schools, to be honest. And so you can imagine if Clifton High School was in pretty bad disrepair, what some of our 100-year-old schools are. And I would just tell you that if you do support this and you do think that it's something that would be beneficial, again, as an employee of the district, I can't tell you to vote yes. You don't live in Clifton. But if you have friends and family members that still would be impacted by this, please encourage them to vote.
Most definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and I think Barry will talk a little more about that later, but that would be very helpful. And thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Liali, for sharing that. I'm going to go ahead and transition us into our next question. And I'm monitoring Facebook chat, and we kind of have a comment related on the same thing, related about the timing, and then also how this will affect taxes for Clifton residents. So I know you touched on that a little bit, but maybe you can expand a little on how this, tangibly is going to affect or look like for taxes for Clifton residents. And I'm gonna read the comment that we have from Facebook if you'd like to respond to that in any way. Someone shared that, they think this is the worst timing to spend over $100 million during a pandemic. Our taxes are already the highest in the area. Parents, please think before voting. So if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, sure. I certainly respect that person's opinion. I pay property taxes too. New Jersey is the highest, has the highest property taxes in the entire country. So I certainly understand where that person is coming from, and I respect their opinion. But I would just say this: $168 million, absolutely a lot of money. The state's going to pay a third. Now, of course, that money comes from taxes too. But that $55 million that the state is going to chip in would never come back to Clifton if not through a referendum. So you're paying those taxes anyway. Clifton never gets a bite of that pie unless it's passed through a referendum. The second thing I would say is your property values are tied directly to how good your schools are, or at least the perception of how good your schools are. So I think just like when you buy a home and you invest in your home and you renovate it and you keep it updated, I firmly believe that these projects that we're going to try to get done in our schools will help improve our schools. I believe, although it's a facility-driven referendum, that it's going to impact student learning and make our schools better. And I think in the long run, it will make the property values for the homeowners in Clifton, I think it would enhance their property values.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. I want to encourage people to keep the comments and questions coming on Facebook or on the Zoom chat. There was a question that popped up during the presentation that I also want to read out loud and see if you wanted to address, and maybe tying this into the referendum that we're talking now of how can we continue to better our school systems for youth. The question was, are there any plans about fighting drugs in school to protect students? Is drug testing in schools available? Are there any resources for students? Any programs to raise awareness about education for students and their families before it's too late? So would this in any way help with that?
That's an excellent question. The referendum doesn't directly address any of those issues, with the exception of the security part. But what I can tell you is that if local money is not spent on these improvements, if these improvements are done through a referendum, then that gives the Board of Education more money in their operating budget to provide more programs that parents are requesting, like this person is asking for. I will say that we do have an array of programs. We work closely with the CASA, which is Clifton Against Substance Abuse, and they provide a lot of programs to our students. There is not necessarily drug testing per se in our schools. But if a student is suspected of being under the influence, they are tested. If a parent has concerns about their child, they can reach out to any of our counselors at any of the schools who can share resources, and we will work with our parents to try to provide them any help that we can get. But I couldn't say that this referendum directly addresses that issue.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just want to, again, encourage folks to keep comments and questions coming, especially if you're on the Zoom call. If you have any further explanations, although the presentation was great, I think it kind of touched on everything. But as people are gathering any questions or comments, we've touched on this, but part of our questions were, more tangibly, like what happens if the vote is a yes, and what happens if the vote is a no, which we've kind of touched on. But anything else maybe to add for either of those?
Yeah, so I can't commit what the Board of Education might do if it's a no vote. What I can say is that if this referendum is voted down, the board will reconvene and try to come up with a plan to address these issues another way. It could be through another referendum. It could be through trying to do these projects over 10, 15, 20 years instead. So I can't say that, but what I can tell you, if the vote is yes, then we immediately begin to get to work. The financial advisors start looking at the bond rates. There's a whole process and procedure for purchasing the bonds. The architects get to work on the drawings and the projects. Then the projects go out to bid, where vendors and companies put in their bids to do the projects. As a public school district, we have to take the lowest bidder, so to make sure that we're getting hopefully a good deal. So if it's a yes, we get to work the very next day. If it's a no, we're going to regroup and see what the next plan of action is.
Yeah, definitely both ways sounds like a plan. We have some questions taking us back to the conversation about taxes. When is the last time the school district raised taxes? And since you've been in the school district, how much have taxes gone up?
So thank you for that question. And I think this is an important thing for everyone who may be on the fence to listen to. The Clifton Board of Education has historically been very conservative when it comes to raising your taxes. And I'll give you the last 3-year example as an example. This year coming up, going into next year, so a school year's budget starts on July 1st. So we're finishing our budget right now for next year. The Clifton Board of Education is proposing a 0% tax increase. The Board of Ed will not be raising your taxes next year. Go back a year ago right now. the Clifton Board of Education did a 0% tax increase for this year. The year before that, the tax increase was 0.8%. So in the last 3 years, your school tax portion of your bill, now there are 3 parts of your tax bill. There's your county, there's the municipal, the city of Clifton, and there's the school taxes. The Clifton Board of Education has only raised your taxes 0.8% in the last 3 years. And I think that's very, very, very important to note, because the board has the authority to raise it up to 2% each year.
Thank you. And kind of along the same line, there's a comment that I'd like to read out loud that someone put that, as a real estate broker, I agree that one of the most important factors in determining home value is the perception about schools. The $17 a month extra tax will be easily offset by the increase in home values when we improve the schools. So it's kind of going back in the same conversation to take us, I feel like we're going back and forth, but taking us back into this is why live conversations are fun. So going back into what happens if yes or no, if it does not pass, how long? There's a question that I got sent to me. If it does not pass, how long will it take to get all this work done?
If this referendum doesn't pass, all this work it's not going to get done. It's not going to be able to get done. It would take 20 years from taking this money to use $168 million out of our regular budget. Remember, our total budget each year is $200 million, right? Vast majority of that budget goes towards paying staff and health benefits and student supplies and stuff. So yeah, it would take 20 years to get that done.
Yeah. So going off of this and responsibilities then on Clifton residents, how much will Clifton residents be on the hook for the total? So is it safe to say that the $22 an average per household can multiply by 10 per month?
I'm sorry, where are you getting the $22 from?
It was a question set.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's 17 for the average homeowner is $17 a month. And that will kick in starting in 2022.
2022. Okay. I don't see, thank you for that. I don't see any more comments or questions on either chat. So I do encourage you all to keep sending them my way. If anyone is on Zoom and wants to share, please feel free to do so. I think while people are wrapping up or sending their final questions, if they have any, I want to emphasize, I know we're talking about registering to vote. For this election, at the time, I think the deadline was March 30th to register to vote. But if you were already, like you mentioned, already registered before, then you definitely should be able to vote on April 20th. We do encourage people to be engaged and to go out and vote. There's a question about where can people vote? That's always a question. And so we at PACC are going to make sure that we help, especially the Arab residents of Clifton, know where they can go, where their polling locations are. But maybe just one last time, if you can kind of remind people when and where and all the logistics of the voting, and just any closing remarks that you have to close us off.
Sure, absolutely. So the polls are open next Tuesday, April 20th from 1:30 to 8 p.m. Schools 5, School 9, Christopher Columbus Middle School, Woodrow Wilson Middle School, Clifton High School. I think I missed one. Barry, do you have the list there?
Barry actually had to step out, so I don't think.
Oh, Barry stepped out. Okay, it was on my presentation, but I'm just going to look real quick on our. So, folks, for all of these questions, you find out this and plenty more information on the Clifton Public Schools website, which is exactly where I'm going to go to figure out which one I just forgot. So when you go on,
actually, do you mind sharing your screen? You are co-host, and maybe taking us through that website and just how to get there? Sorry, I totally put you on the spot. Thank you.
No, the only issue is, as as I mentioned earlier, and I don't know if everybody, not everybody who's on now, is about 10 minutes before this meeting, I spilt a cup of tea on my laptop and it's not working. And so I'm using a different computer. Thank you. Mr. Rose put this on the website. School 5, School 9, School 12 was what I missed. Christopher Columbus, Woodrow Wilson, Clifton High School. But I'm happy to share. Let me share my screen. Let me close that. Okay. Okay, so I'm hoping you can see my screen, Abira, yes?
Yeah, we can.
I'll show my emails. So when you go to clifton.k12.nj.us, it's going to take you to our main page. And right at the top of the page, you will see click here for information about the referendum vote. And when you click on that, it's eventually going to take you to our One Clifton referendum site. So on this website, you will find there is a video where our architects and myself did join back to February. And there's a guide on the video where you can tune in. If you have a question or you want to see something specifically about the cost summary, you can go to 33 minutes of the video. If you just want to go to learn information about the security entrances, you can just go to that time. So that video is important. There is up here 5 sections. If you want to just learn about projects, this will take you to all the projects. Security entrances, HVAC, boiler upgrades, frequently asked questions on the website. The question there's a whole host of questions. There's a answer. Just anything you could possibly want to know is and then there's information on voting, which is where I was going to go to see where the polls were. And here's the voting information. There's mail now applications if you want. I still think you can get them in by tomorrow. There's forms and all the locations. And then if you're just interested in learning more about the financial aspect of this, you can click on the financial to this page, and right off that, you can see how you would be impacted. If you're a homeowner and you know your assessed value, you just look at this chart. It's going to tell you about how much you're going to pay a year. And if you don't know your assessed value, you can click on this link that says use this website to research the assessment of your property. You go to this website, you type in your address, it's public knowledge, so it'll tell you what your assessed value is. You then come back and you look at this chart and you can figure out how much it's going to cost you. You can also do this on Zillow.com. Zillow is a very popular website. And then there's some more information on the finances. And the senior tax freeze program. If you're a senior whose taxes are frozen, this is not going to impact you. Your taxes will not go up. So is that good enough?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. I think there was a little bit of a lag with Wi-Fi, but we'll make sure that everyone has all this information too, and has the website, and we're definitely going to do our best to just also encourage our community to vote. I don't see any more questions or comments, and I want to be respectful of your time and everyone else's time. So I really do just want to, on behalf of PACC and everyone who is watching, thank you again, Dr. Robert Tosi, for being with us tonight, for sharing this, for advocating for our youth. And thank you all for joining and for being part of PACC civic engagement and making sure our community votes. If you have any questions, whether it's about voter registration or any other local upcoming elections, please feel free to call PACC or reach out to PACC, and we're more than happy to help anyone figure out polling locations, get things translated in Arabic, everything else. We are definitely here to make sure our voices are heard in the local elections. So thank you all. Thank you again, Dr. Robert Tosi. I think there's a little bit of a lag, but I do just want to thank you on behalf of everyone.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everyone. And like you started us off, I just want to wish everyone Ramadan Kareem who celebrates, since it does start tomorrow. So thank you all and have a good night. Thank you. And like